hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to another episode of the Indigo Womb Wisdom Podcast. I'm your host and sister friend, Shatia T. Owsley, and thank you for watching and or listening. So sit back, grab some tea and a notebook, and let's vibe together as we have organic and practical conversations embracing intuitive womb wisdom, spirituality, and a sprinkle of magic to rebel, restore, and radiate overall wellness in our lives. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Indigo Womb Wisdom Podcast. I am your host and your sister friend, Shatia T. Owsley, and today I would like to introduce our guest, Larissa Trelles. So I'm going to read Larissa's bio. Larissa, I'm so happy that you're here today. Larissa is an indigenous queer, neurospicy Latina therapist offering services in Spanish, Portuguese, and English. As a first-gen professional committed to anti-oppressive, decolonizing clinical care, Larissa works with the LGBTQIA2S plus BIPOC, neurodivergent, and chronic illness communities to reclaim identity, healing, and autonomy. They adapt their work to the lived experience of each person, centering authenticity, ancestral wisdom, and radical safety in all they do. I am so excited that you are here today. I read your bio, but tell the people where this journey started before you got to be so neurospicy, as you say.
Yes. So I was thinking about it the other day, and sometimes when we initiate therapy, which is a very westernized way of seeing it, that there are other ways through community, through art. And I would have to say that around my teenage years, there was a deep calling to understanding human behavior and also using meditation and things really connected to Hinduism and Buddhism that were really calling for me, which was difficult to navigate as a teenager living in a household in a community that's really centered around Catholicism and very strict in the way that anything that deviates from that is demonized. But I think being able to witness what it did for me firsthand and then things aligning themselves. I lived on my own when I was 19 with very little emotional or financial support. Eventually got a job that had the health insurance that allowed me to do what I needed to do for myself, and the universe and the creator doing what is necessary for us, which was I contacted a bunch of people. One of them was like, I'm not taking any people, but I have this colleague that I think that you would be a good fit for. And very similar to me, first gen, Puerto Rican. And I remember the first day I showed into that appointment, I just felt something. I had this voice in my head that said, you're home. This is the place. I had come to that place with a list of things that I had identified that I wanted to work on. And he mentioned I had good insight. And I was like, I know this is what I want to work on, but I'm stuck. And having the guidance of someone that saw me for who I was, that I didn't need to translate, that I could be speaking Spanish and English and understood the nuances of existing within these two worlds of what it means to be Latina and also be an American or living in the US. And I'm very thankful because along that road, I had a desk job that I felt that it took me where I needed. It was paying the bills, but it wasn't fulfilling that deeper need of purpose, of I have this desk job. It's getting me money. I'm getting money for the people that I work for, but what goes beyond that? And it was through exploration with that therapist of mine that it came up to conversation that under his impression of getting to know me, that I possessed really good skills of insight, of empathy, and that I should consider looking into going into therapy. Also, what happens with a lot of first gen Latina people is a lot of us come from struggle. And I think not even just Latina, BIPOC, where we don't have people within our family of like, hey, I'm trying to go into med school. I'm trying to do this. What can I do? A lot of the people around us have blue collar jobs and they can only share with us based on their experiences. So having him was instrumental because I remember one of the things he was like, Larissa, make sure that you find a program that's accredited by KCREP. He was like, don't fall into the marketing gimmicks aligned to equivalent to, he said, because it's going to be a pain, I mean, to get licensed by the state. And I was very appreciative. I took a couple of breaks, things worked out, but really coming into that, there were a lot of things that initially just didn't sit well. A lot of the wellness industry is very white centric, and there were parts of the nuances of marginalized identities that it just didn't capture. Like the hyperfixation on the DSM to the point that now, where I am in my practice and the confidence that I have in what I do and being able to work by myself. I think that's also a big role versus when you're being supervised, and supervision has a very specific structure. You're working for a company that whitewashes a lot of what wellness has to offer. Is I make it very open conversation of what my relationship is to the DSM-5, and that it's very narrow in what is a humanity. Even when we go from, I tell them, it's middle-aged white men from a very particular group that created this book. And when we look back to that, it's the same group that when Black people wanted to be free, they're like, oh, well, it's a pathology because somebody wants to be free. And so really examining that, and definitely what has taken it even a step further is because I love learning, and I was able to get fully credentialed. I have my private practice, and they wanted to become a doctor. And a couple of years ago, I watched a documentary about Dr. Ruth, and I saw how she got her PhD at age 40. Aside from all of the challenges that she had to overcome, being the only surviving member of her family, but then being smuggled out of the country, not being able to learn because the role as a female was very, very narrow. And I said to myself, if she could do it and she was able to do it at age 40, I can do it too. Because navigating, we're also around that time of like, we have to choose. We're people with uteruses. What does parenthood and motherhood look like? And all of those things. And based on my geographical location, it ended up working out that the program was a human sexuality program. I go to Widener. And I had projected to myself, I want to be the Latina Dr. Ruth. And that's where we are now. We're at year 2
Mhm.
of the program. And that has also exposed me a lot to the origin stories of a lot of the protocols and systems that we navigate when it comes to wellness. It's like clockwork. Every time there's learning about history, it all goes back to the root of it being anti-Blackness, different body shapes, the way that we eat. I mean, even when I learned about what happened with spices, you have a doctor, I didn't even know if he was a doctor, but that's how he was referred to. The creator of cornflakes, the creator of graham crackers, which based on the reports, they did not taste anything like what they taste now. But it was a very purist movement that had the connection that if you had spices, then that was going to cause you to be more sexual and engage in masturbation. And based on that line of belief, that was something wrong. So let's take all flavor out of life. Let's take flavor out of our foods. Let's take flavor out of how we engage with our bodies and engage with other people's bodies. And again, just this reaffirmation of where I am in my journey, that learning about these principles and the sources of like, oh, that doesn't align. And then a parallel in my personal life, I would say for the last 5 to 6 years has been this calling, reconnect with the roots, being someone whose people come all the way from Ecuador in South America. There's a lot of our history that has been erased with being colonized. Like Paraguay is always a great example because they have in schooling, they not only learn Spanish, which of course is the aftermath of being colonized, but they also learn Guarani, which is their native language. And I think that that's beautiful and one of the very significant ways of staying connected to who we are. Because we see it time and time again with BIPOC communities when they strip us of what makes our language, the way we dress, then we're easily controllable. We are able to have this sense of longing, but we don't know what it is because it becomes so distant to us. So my mission in my work is to be able to integrate all of those things, to integrate our ancestry, to integrate what really connects us to our roots and recognize what pieces of that are what brings us joy and what pieces of that maybe don't necessarily. And a lot of it, it's intermixed. I think that's also the other part of it,
Yeah.
recognizing that there isn't anything that is 100% one thing. Even when it comes to spirituality, we see the traditional, I forget the actual acronym for it, but the traditionally African religions, when how they map themselves out in Latin America. There is that connection of the indigenous, the African, and then also the Spaniard or the Europeans in playing into it. And okay, how can we build from that? How
Uh-huh.
can we reconnect to that? And that's really important to who I am, not only as an individual, but also who I show up when it comes to my profession.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. Let's dive into a few of the points that you made. Let's go back. What is wellness to you? And for someone who may not know the definition of wellness, what is the difference between health and wellness? Do you feel like there is a difference between the two?
Yeah, well, I think with those two words, they have been greatly weaponized against us. It's always about in this capitalist society of like, well, you're not doing these things. You're not drinking your green juice. You're not doing these things that you need to do in order to be successful. And the fact that a lot of these practices that are repackaged and then sold to us belong to us.
Uh-huh.
Like I
Uh-huh.
recall growing up given cold pressed juices all the time. I was forced back then. Now I willingly overpay.
Right.
But that and the fact that health and wellness, even if we want to intertwine them, it's a very well-rounded concept that it's not only, you know, we might go to the nutritionist and they're being concerned about what we ingest. But we don't only ingest by inserting stuff in our mouths. We ingest media. We ingest energies when we're having relationships with people. And the one of the things too that we see that a lot of it happens in this country, and I use it as the frame of work because it's what I know, but I have also had the opportunity to live in South America and be able to see the difference. And a lot of people, when they immigrate to this country, the culture shock is, yeah, not being able to rely on community in the way that they do in the motherland and how that is detrimental to us. So for me, when I think of wellness, is thinking about the things that do us good, the food, the people, the music, the environment, the textures, because that's the other thing too. As learning about myself and being neurodivergent of yes, sometimes it's not about an individual being difficult and wanting to maybe ruin the mood, but they are very sensitive to big lights, to loud sounds. So it's like, how can we do that? And for a while too, remember with the fidget spinners,
Uh-huh.
like
Uh-huh.
and all of those things. For a while, the focus was a lot on children. And not that children are not important, but we should not view it in a way that tending to our sensorial needs is something that we phase out when we're no
Uh-huh.
longer children. And that's
Uh-huh.
why I tell the people that I work with, I now specialize mostly with adults, is how can you tend to yourself sensorially? You're having a hard day. I'm not going to tell you to go and do the most and be even more exhausted, but maybe a comforting meal. For instance, I lead by example, a fuzzy blanket, something of that sort. So thinking about the things, and even in examining relationships, how am I feeling after I step out? Am I eager that I can't wait to see them again? Or am I feeling depleted? So that's the way that I like to define it for people to kind of run inventory in a way that makes sense to them of being able to live in the moment. For instance, movement. I'm a big proponent on movement in a way that makes sense to you and that brings joy. Because again, in the repackaging, well, you need to exercise and it needs to look like this, but it's very limiting. Some of us, throughout different stages of our lives, or even currently, may not have access. It may not be safe to walk outside,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
or our bodies do not allow it because we either have a disability that may be invisible to other people, or stuff that really impairs us, like missing a limb or struggling with chronic pain. So again, the it's not what people are telling me to do, figuring out. And one of the ways that I try to do that with the folks that are interested in my services and when they come in is during intake, I ask them what they do for fun. What are some activities that bring them happiness? And because a lot of times people that come into my setting, whether it's virtual or my in-person office, have a large history of trauma and are marginalized through different intersections of their identity, they have a hard time answering that question. And that's the moment when I say, that's okay, we can revisit it. And then down the line, they're able to figure out what makes them happy.
Well, let me just go back and say, I love how you were able to define what wellness is for you and how you integrate it into the work that you do. I think sometimes, like you said, we have a certain picture of what wellness looks like, right? So I love that you take the time and the effort to really help your clients define what wellness looks like for them and to help them understand, let's not listen to all the noise that's outside. Let's come inside and let's reconnect with yourself and find out your own definition on wellness and what that may look like for you. You use the term neurodivergent. I'm familiar with the term, but for those who don't know what the term neurodivergent means, I would like for you to, expound upon that a little bit more.
So, neurodivergent is an umbrella term, and also in the reclaiming of it is the being neurospicy because our brains are wired differently. So, it's the umbrella term to encompass anything ranging from autism, which with the last change of the DSM, now it's just autism spectrum disorder, rather than other names that were very focused on levels of functioning, which something that I also have issue with rather than assistance that is needed. But going back to the question, autism, ADHD, dyscalculia, dyslexia, and dyscalculia, for those that don't know, it's basically what happens with dyslexia, but with numbers. And something that I found out through my own research, because I wasn't diagnosed until I was older, is I have a hard time reading analog clock. And of course, we grow up in an environment that if you can't do certain things, it's a failing and all of those things. And I was able to find out that because it has to do with numbers, it is a way that dyscalculia shows up. And that's also why, even when I talk about the DSM in my space, go and again, giving the people that come to see me the ability to reclaim choice, because with trauma survivors, that choice has been taken away. So it's like, okay, this is what I think about the DSM. However, I also recognize that for someone, a diagnosis can be very life affirming and validating on their experience. So, as I go with everything, I tell them we take what serves us and we leave the rest. And with that being said, it's like, okay, now that you know, for example, have had a lot of people that have suspicions because self diagnosis is typically the first step. Like, I notice that things are a little bit different, that I have a harder time focusing, or that I jumble letters together, or that I have issues reading an analog clock, or if I'm being dictated numbers, I switch them around when I speak them, even though I know it's a 9 and a 6, but I see 4 and 3, whatever the case might be. And with that being said, it's like, okay, I refer you, you have that diagnosis. And I've seen a lot of the change in a lot of people. Now I know. Now I know why I had a challenging time doing this, or why connecting with this kind of communication or this kind of media. And especially in learning how that can also be very insightful.
Uh-huh.
Of, well, the thought of having to read a study guide that is about 3 inches thick just overwhelms me. I'm overcome with anxiety. I don't want to do anything. And then I go through a spiral of guilt and shame because I should be doing these things. And I am also very open about strategies that I have figured out that work for me. For instance, when it comes to audiobooks, I love audiobooks. I could be doing something else and I could be listening to the audiobooks. And I have recognized that my ability to retain information from audiobooks is something that cannot be compared to when I have to read something, to the point that There are a lot of apps out there nowadays that if you have to read PDFs, they give you the option, you know, we're still green in that part of technology, but they will read as you go and highlight the areas. And sometimes we need that. So I always tell my clients, it's okay, now we know and we have a little bit of a blueprint of how your brain works. So what we can use after that is how can you better support yourself? What can you bring into your life to allow you to navigate, the absorbing of information or sticking to your routine? How can you help the executive dysfunction, which is typically what is very common for those of us that have ADHD? That is the knowing that you have to do certain tasks, but feeling paralyzed by it, and how that, in combination with anxiety, can bring a lot of dysregulation within folks. So, again, I always big on I'm presenting you the information. This is what we got. Where do you want to go from here? Even
Mhm.
on my intake, how can I be of best assistance? For some people, it's like, I need structure. I want to be called out. I need you to tell me when I'm doing this specific thing again. Uh, and in other cases, it's like, I've never been in therapy. I'm not familiar how this process works. I don't know where to start. What do
Mhm.
you think? And it's like, okay, we can kind of go with the flow because things will come up as they feel necessary, as they happen in your week. And again, it's just that it needs to make sense to you.
Mhm.
And I think that's the best way that I like to approach and the way that I do my work, and that it has been well received by those who seek me.
What do you think are the contributing factors of why so many adults are now being diagnosed later in life?
Okay. Yeah. So I would have to say that a lot of the things that happen specifically within millennials and my observation with BIPOC millennials is a lot of us are getting to a point in life where we've had to work really hard and get to a place to have access to education and information, and things start clicking because I think there is a large portion of erasure that happens within Black and Brown communities when it comes to certain things. For example, like autism and the way that it presents itself, and that it can only happen to white people. And also how stimming that can happen with autism or having a meltdown is particularly unsafe for folks like us because we are already seen as dangerous. So there's a internally from a very young age, we are receiving this messaging of how we have to mask. Sometimes it's not only the outside world and how we're perceived because of our racialized identities, but also within the household of what it is. Well, don't talk back, or you're going to have to eat that. And it may be a texture thing, and it's not the child trying to make your life difficult. So, what I am seeing a lot is with the internet as well. I am a firm believer that TikTok is very helpful in the sense that people share their stories, and I will have either friends or people in my professional life come to me and like, look, I'm not trying to say that I diagnosed myself or anything, but I'm hearing these things and I'm seeing these similarities. And I think the openness of folks going on the internet and talking about their experiences and that they have decided to take that leap of getting diagnosed is what is encouraging other people. And that's that's priceless because again, a lot of us end up being the first ones within our families to explore these systems, go into the unknown, seeking answers.
Mhm. Mhm. For sure. And you made such a valid point because you don't want to be seen as a disruption or an aggressor. So you are masking. We are carrying a lie. And I do think that it's a positive thing that people are sharing their stories and that they are being able to be open. Again, it is affirming to know that you're not alone and that you're not losing it. What is your advice if someone feels as though some of these characteristics are what I'm experiencing, what should be their next step?
Well, and I think that's where part of my favorite subject comes even in my bio. I talk a lot about anti oppression And the problem comes to that there are all these systemic challenges that we have to encounter. A lot of, whether it's not having health insurance, and then even with having health insurance, finding a provider that can see us for who we are. Even when we think about autism and ADHD, statistically, and especially in like the early stages when it started to be known, labeled, because not that it didn't exist. The way majority of folks that were being diagnosed very young and that has to do a lot because they had that data, those were the parameters that were being used for people to get diagnosed. So for someone who was assigned female at birth, that might be extremely talkative, especially back then. Well, no, because autism is withdrawn, all of these conceptions. So there are a lot of stuff in the cracks that were missed. And then I think that's also the important thing in kind of the work that you do and the work that I do. And the fact of the representation within services that can help in our wellness. Finding someone that can understand our experience, that we don't have to translate ourselves. And I'm not even speaking about language. And knowing that, for instance, like a first gen coming into my space and then talking to me about how their family might perceive what it means to go into therapy. Like, same, I know. And really figuring out that part because there's always this thing of it's the all or nothing mentality that we have to choose one side or another when based on our circumstances we end up being this rich amalgamation of both. So the biggest thing that if your circumstances allow, I would have to say, to look for someone that you can relate to. When it comes to therapy, I know for a long time, the biggest online directory in the game has been Psychology Today. With that being said, I have recognized, and I was on there for a while, but it's very, very specific. It's very white centric. And I think it doesn't allow the opportunity for BIPOC people that may be looking for something more. So I know Inclusive Therapists is a very good page. And along with that, there's also Latinx Therapy. I know there are other directories out there specifically if you're looking for things specifically for your identity, there's a directory out there that specializes working with sex workers. Like there's anything that you can think about, there is a directory that has been created so you can find one. And the other thing too is make sure that whoever you're reaching out to offers a 15-minute consultation. You got to check the vibe. You have to see if it works.
Mhm.
You know, as one of the things that I learned early on in my career, and I am still early on, but like in the beginning days, is recognizing that I may not be the match for every single person. And that's okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
And the same thing goes with, you meet with someone, they might seem cool, but you're like, I'm just not feeling it. And there's something very emotionally intimate about the therapy process. You'll be talking about things that sometimes you may have not even told anybody. So if you don't feel comfortable, then it might not necessarily be the person. And I also understand there's a discouraging. You're taking this step, it feels scary, and you didn't find it. But if you have the ability to, definitely looking for a therapist. There's some community centers that offer support groups for specific situations or identities that also because we cannot discount the value of community.
Mhm. Mhm. For sure. I think that's a great segue. Let's talk about your work in decolonizing wellness, specifically in sexuality. How did you figure out this was an area that you wanted to tap into? What is your approach to decolonizing, sexuality in having it be more wellness centered?
So, one of the things that I have noticed the more that I talk to other professionals is typically the niche ends up being something really close to our hearts.
Mhm.
In this process, I learned, I would say, within the last 3 or 4 years through my own therapy, because that's also something that I'm very open about. I am a therapist that goes to therapy and takes medication. because I think the relatability and the humanity needs to be at the center of what we do. You don't want someone that just, the blank slate. I have a lot of thoughts of what school teaches us. If someone's sharing with you something happy and you're completely neutral, or they're sharing something sad and they just have a stoic face in front of them. That can be very discouraging for someone opening up. So in that process, I discovered parts of my sexuality as I'm recognizing that I know maybe it should have been something I said in the beginning, but like I go by she, they pronouns and learning about what it means to be non binary, as well as connecting to the fact that I'm bisexual. I started to do a lot of research on my own and then being connected with my program. And I started to question a lot of the things of, well, this is wrong and this is wrong. And again, I came from a very strict Catholic environment, that yes, maybe you don't go to church every day, but Catholicism is so deeply woven into how you navigate life that it's still very impactful. So you learn a lot about it. And in the decolonizing myself and indigenizing myself, I started learning about, for instance, one of the perfect examples is there's a community within Mexico in the region of Oaxaca that is known as the Mushes. And the Mushes are considered to be the third gender, which typically I don't want to say that it's not inclusive, but it's very specific. It's typically someone that was assigned male at birth, but that does not feel like they're male. So in that, they start to shift in the way that they dress and they fulfill very traditionally feminine roles. And there's such a connection with indigenousness because the way that they dress and the kind of artwork that does, it's very colorful and very connected to that. So that allowed me to really learn about the shift when we see communities being colonized and how it's like it only can exist in this way, and if you don't do it this way, you're wrong and you're going to go to hell. And as I was learning that, I said, okay, let's think about what else has been stripped away from us. And for me, being Latina, being bisexual, and being non-binary, there was that fork in the road of feeling, what does it mean? So if I choose to go this way, does it mean that I disconnect from who I am and my roots? Because that's the other layer of it. That when we think about queerness and what it means to be part of the LGBTQ community, a lot of it is very centered around whiteness. I had, again, very grateful to to the program that I'm part of. I had the opportunity to meet Onyx. They are a leather siblinghood. It started as a brotherhood, Onyx Mid Atlantic. And they started the program because, as Black men that wanted to experience the kink and BDSM culture, when they walked into spaces that were predominantly white, they were kicked out. They were not welcomed. And as the Black community always does, they create spaces where all of us are welcome. And then there's another group that came out of it, because that one is the Onyx is specifically for men and anyone that identifies as male. And then we have Onyx Pearls. So if we have non-binary, if you connect to any form of femininity and female, you're welcome in that space. So the more you learn about this and we look back into history, these ways of life, it's not that they didn't exist. It's not that the world is going to, we're just going through a time and evil has taken over. So as I started to really connect and meet other people that were living life in that way, I recognize the gap that existed within wellness. And I'm located in Southern Delaware. So we were on the wrong side of the Civil War. And then if you're queer, then the most likely which is also sad, that queer competency within mental health is like a badge of honor or this specialty when it should be the baseline. It is highly unlikely that you will find someone that looks like me. And recognizing that my experiences isn't unique either. So that has been very central. And please let me know if I missed any part of the question that needed to be answered, because it's very central to who I am as an individual, and that's why is how I choose to show up as a professional for for people that come into my space.
Yeah. No, I think you did. But I also think that there is no right answer, and I think that it's so broad. So we were able to scratch the surface, but I think that this is a topic that we could just talk about for hours. And hours because it is so broad. But I do appreciate your transparency, and I do appreciate you telling your story because I think so many people need to hear it, right? We need to know that there are others that we can share our feelings with. I think that it's absolutely beautiful. And I do think that that is the difference when you find the right therapist, right? Is that you have the ability to truly thrive and grow to be your true authentic self because a sacred and safe space has been created for you to be able to explore all the areas and all of those experiences and spaces that you were unable to explore just out in the world, navigating on your own. And so I honor and appreciate you for beautifully sharing what it may look like. And like I said, you just scratch the surface because it's so much deeper than that. Let's see. Before we start to, just kind of to wind down a little bit within our conversation, I would like to know what are some of the things that you are doing now to support your community, closing out 2025 and going into 2026. You're doing a lot. I see you doing a lot. Y'all have to watch her on TikTok. But what's on the horizon for you?
Okay, so one of the things that as far as that I offer, I have a couple of pro bono spots. I do sliding scales, as well as I know things are a little uncertain right now, but I do have the ability to offer mental health evaluation for immigration applications for people that have gone through any form of trauma, that have been trafficked. And even when we think about trafficking, it's not limited to sex trafficking. It can also be trafficking by work. Like you thought you were going to come here and then that you were going to have autonomy. So there are multiple ways. If you have been a victim of a crime living here, part of what I am shifting into, in addition to my work, is also speaking, being able to do speeches, whether it's about decolonizing or doing anything connected to guided meditations. Inner child work is something that's very close to my heart because it's been an incredible tool, not only for me, but being able to use it with people that come into my office. And the fact that we have these different facets of ourselves that live within us and they have contributed to the person that we are today.
Yeah, beautiful. So, how can we love on you and how can we support you moving forward in your work? How can people contact you?
Name of my business is Mindful Psychotherapeutics. It looks a little bit different. So for Instagram, it's Mindful Psychotherapeutics completely spelled out. TikTok has a limit on characters. So instead of ending in TICS, it's TIX. And then I think those are the two ones that I'm the mostly active at this time. Typically, what I post, relatable, there's some education, inspirational, dance videos, a little bit of sass, and just the things to be able to get through these times, which are particularly challenging.
Yes, please say that part again. But before I let you go, I want to say that I enjoyed our initial conversation that we had. So I absolutely knew that I wanted to talk to you further so that you could share your work. And I feel like we need like 3 hours of time for us to talk, right? And just to continue to keep diving in because you made so many valid points and you provided so much information. So that means you're going to have to come back, right? Because I need you to dive into a few things a little bit more. But what I hope that people are able to take away today from what you shared is that community is extremely important. There is a shift and people are tapping back in to community and to their ancestral roots, even if they don't fully understand it. I feel like people are starting to deeply feel a calling in their spirit that there is something more and something deeper than what the US is providing in our capitalist society. Um, and so I appreciate you creating a safe space for people to share. And it's so you're touching so many different groups in so many different communities. And so you guys have to reach out to Larissa and work with her if you feel the vibe. Check her out on I just love to watch your videos of you just being so carefree, and I think we need more of that. We need to, in many ways, get out of our own way in order for our light to truly shine, for us to be who we were called to be. And you are helping people to do that. And I love that. But before we go, I always ask one question, one last question of our guests before we sign off. And that question is, with everything that you have been through and all of your lived experience, what would you tell little Larissa?
I would tell little Larissa, first of all, that it gets better for sure. And now I can understand why people get a little I get emotional with that, and that it's that light. It's that light that she has inside her, that energy, that burst of life. It's just like a lifeline. That is what brings us to who we are now. Because there's a period where we disconnect a little bit. But that when we start reconnecting with that, with our artistic self, with the painting, with the colors, with the being loud,
With the spices?
exactly. With the being unapologetically us.
Yes.
You know, the you're too sensitive, you're too much. No, you just can't handle all this voltage. That's the difference.
Come on, Larissa. Come on. I love it. Well, I want to say thank you so much for being with me today. You definitely have to come back. I love our time together. And I hope that, like I said, I hope that people really take away hey, the sun does not apologize for being bright, and neither should you. Okay?
Yes.
So thank you everyone for joining us today. Again, thank you, Larissa, for being here today. And we will see you in our next episode. Peace.